Okay, so we talk a lot about right and wrong, the don'ts, the things you just shouldn't do. But what about the flip side? Like, are we required to help people, make things better for others? Or is that just like a nice bonus? Like, you get extra credit if you do, but it's not really a must?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really gets to the heart of it.
Yeah.
And that idea, that question of whether we're obligated to do good, it all comes down to this concept called beneficence.
Beneficence. Okay, I like it. It has a nice ring to it. So today's deep dive is all about beneficence.
It is. And we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as our guide, their entry on beneficence. It's pretty in-depth, so we'll have plenty to unpack.
Perfect. I always say, got to go to the source, right?
Right.
And I think our listeners will appreciate that too. They like to get into the nitty gritty, but without all the super technical jargon.
Absolutely. So this deep dive, it's for anyone who wants to understand this idea of beneficence, this obligation to benefit others. And, it's not just some abstract philosophical concept. It's woven into so many aspects of our lives.
Oh, I bet. I'm already thinking about social programs, healthcare, even how businesses are supposed to act ethically.
Exactly. All of that and more. So let's lay out our plan for this deep dive. We're going to start by defining what beneficence actually is and how it's different from just being, a good person, which is benevolence. Then we'll look at how some big thinkers, Hume, Mill, Kant, how they tackle these ideas.
Okay, got to get the historical perspective. Love it.
Yeah, essential, right? Then we'll dig into the big debate. Is beneficence something we have to do? Like, is it a duty? Or is it more like an aspiration, something we should aim for, but not necessarily required to do?
Yeah, that's a good one. I can see both sides of that already.
Right. And then we'll get into the tricky question of when the demand for beneficence maybe goes too far. And a philosopher named Peter Singer, his work is really central to that conversation.
Oh, I've heard of him. He's got some pretty strong views, right?
He does. We'll unpack them. And then we'll also look at situations where we might actually limit someone's freedom for their own good.
Yeah.
That gets into paternalism, which always sparks debate.
Oh, yeah, that's a thorny one. Lots of different opinions on that.
For sure. And lastly, we'll bring it all down to earth, see how these principles actually play out in specific areas. We'll focus on biomedical ethics, like the doctor-patient relationship, and business ethics, where things can get especially murky.
Sounds like a packed deep dive. I'm ready. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? Beneficence. What is it exactly? I get it's about being good, helping others, but how is it different from just being a good person, benevolent?
Right, good place to start. So think of beneficence as the actions, the actual doing. It's about actively promoting well-being, doing things that benefit others, and trying to prevent harm. It's like giving to charity, volunteering your time, even just holding the door for someone.
Okay, so the actions.
Yeah, exactly. Now, benevolence, that's more like the inner feeling. It's the disposition, the inclination to be good and do good for others.
So beneficence is the outward stuff, and benevolence is the inner motivation, kind of.
Exactly. You're spot on. Beneficence is the principle in action, and benevolence is that warm, fuzzy feeling that drives it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the source talks about a principle of beneficence, so it's more than just a warm, fuzzy feeling, then.
You got it. The principle of beneficence, it's like the moral rule book saying, hey, we have a duty to help each other out. It's not just a suggestion. It's like we're obligated to benefit others.
Interesting, but does that mean every action that benefits someone else is a moral obligation? Like, if I donate a ton of money to charity, is that something I was required to do?
Ah, great question. So there's this thing called supererogatory acts. These are good deeds, like really good deeds, that go above and beyond what's strictly required.
Above and beyond, superhero stuff.
Kind of. Like, think of someone who donates a kidney to a stranger or dedicates their whole life to helping others without getting paid. It's amazing, incredibly virtuous, but not everyone has to do that, right? It's not a moral obligation for everyone.
Okay, so there's a difference between what we have to do, like basic moral duties, and those really amazing, super good actions. Got it.
Precisely. And the source mentions a continuum of beneficence, meaning it's not just black and white, duty or no duty. There are shades in between.
A continuum, so different levels of obligation.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a spectrum. On one end, you have simple things, like telling someone they dropped their wallet.
Low effort, but still good.
Right. Then, as the potential good increases and the cost to you decreases, the obligation gets stronger, like helping someone who's fallen and can't get up. And then beyond that, you get into those supererogatory acts where you might even risk your own safety to help someone.
So like a sliding scale of good deeds, from simple stuff to heroic actions.
Exactly. And even within the realm of obligation, there are degrees. It's more demanding to not walk past someone who's injured than to volunteer in your community, even though both are good things.
Makes sense. It's all about context and what's reasonable to expect, right?
Right. And the parable of the Good Samaritan, remember that one? That's a good example of this continuum. He helped the injured man, which was clearly good, but was he morally obligated to do that in every similar situation? It's debatable.
Yeah, lots of layers to this. So let's shift gears a bit and look at how some famous philosophers thought about this whole idea of being good and helping others. The source starts with Hume. What was his take on it?
Yeah, Hume, he was all about benevolence. He saw it as a fundamental part of human nature, like built right into us.
So not just something we learn, but something we're born with.
Exactly. He believed that empathy, compassion, goodwill towards others, that's all part of our natural makeup. He even said it's what drives our sense of morality, our ideas of right and wrong.
So for him, benevolence wasn't just a nice to have. It was essential for being moral and living together as a society.
Right. And he was pushing back against this idea called psychological egoism, which basically says that everyone is ultimately selfish and every action is motivated by self-interest.
Kind of cynical, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit. But Hume said, no, that's not how it is. He believed we have a genuine capacity to care for others, separate from any personal gain. He even contrasted benevolence with justice.
Interesting. How so?
He saw justice more as a human invention, like rules we create to keep things fair and orderly. But benevolence, that was a natural instinct, a deep part of who we are.
Okay, so Hume puts a lot of emphasis on this inborn capacity for goodness. What about Mill? How did he fit this into his whole utilitarianism thing?
Mill. So he takes this idea of benefiting others and makes it, I'd say, even more central and maybe even more demanding.
More demanding in what sense?
Remember, he's all about the greatest happiness principle. Basically, the idea is that an action is good if it creates the most happiness for the most people.
Okay, yeah, I remember that. Sounds good in theory.
Right. But here's the thing. He's saying that our moral duties, like what we're obligated to do, comes from this principle. So if you can do something that will significantly increase happiness for a bunch of people, even if it means some sacrifice for you, well, for Mill, that might be your moral duty.
Wow, so my own happiness takes a back seat to the happiness of the group. That's intense.
Yeah, it's a pretty outward-focused ethical system. It's all about the consequences of our actions and the overall well-being of everyone involved. It's not just about you. It's about the collective good.
Definitely makes you think. Okay, so Hume says benevolence is in our nature, and Mill says we should strive to create the most happiness for the most people, even if it's tough. What about Kant? He was a bit different, right?
Oh yeah, Kant was coming at it from a whole other angle. He wasn't so focused on feelings or consequences like Hume and Mill. He was all about duty and reason.
Duty and reason. Very Kant.
Right. So he's saying that beneficence, helping others, is a duty. We are morally obligated to do it. But the key thing for Kant is the motivation. It can't just be because you feel sorry for someone or because it makes you feel good about yourself.
Oh, interesting. So the why matters just as much as the what.
Exactly. He's saying that for an action to be truly morally good, it has to be done out of a sense of duty because you recognize it's the right thing to do, not because you're hoping for a reward or a pat on the back.
Okay, so it's not just about the outcome, it's about the intention behind it.
Exactly. And he believed this duty to help others, it's universal. Everyone has it. But, and this is important, he also said it's not unlimited.
Not unlimited. Like there are limits to how much we have to sacrifice for others.
Right. He wasn't saying we should all become martyrs or impoverish ourselves to help others. There's a balance.
Makes sense. So we've got Hume saying benevolence is natural, Mill saying maximize happiness, Kant saying do your duty. Sounds like a lot of different ways to approach this idea of beneficence.
They were all wrestling with the same question, right? How should we treat each other? What do we owe to one another? But none of them really laid out like a clear-cut formula for where that obligation ends.
Yeah, it's messy. And that brings us to the next big question, which is like the heart of the matter. Is beneficence a strict duty, something we must do? Or is it more like a moral ideal, something we should strive for but aren't necessarily bound to do?
Yeah, that's the debate. Right?
Yeah.
And some of those theories we talked about, they lean more towards the obligation side. Like utilitarianism, especially some interpretations of it, can get pretty demanding.
Demanding in what way?
Well, if your actions, your resources, even your skills could significantly increase happiness or alleviate suffering, some utilitarians would say you're obligated to use them in that way, even if it means making big sacrifices in your own life.
Wow, that's a high bar. Like constantly asking yourself, am I doing enough? It's almost like you can never do enough.
Right. And that's where some people push back. They say, hold on, this isn't realistic. Most people don't live that way, and it goes against our basic intuitions about morality. Like donating a big chunk of your income to charity. Most people see that as exceptionally good, not as a requirement.
Yeah, I get that. It's like admirable, not obligatory. But then the source mentions this philosopher, Bernard Gert, who seems to go in the opposite direction. He says we have no general obligations of beneficence, like at all.
Yeah, he takes a much more minimalist view. He's all about non-maleficence, which is basically do no harm. For Gert, beneficence is more like a moral ideal, a good thing to do, but not something you're morally required to do in every situation.
So for him, it's more about not making things worse than actively making things better. Interesting.
Right. He's saying that morality is primarily about preventing bad things from happening, and the obligation to actively promote good things is more limited and depends on the context.
That's a very different perspective. But the source says that most philosophers, they kind of fall somewhere in between. They see both not harming and helping as obligations, but maybe not harming is seen as more fundamental.
That's generally the consensus, yeah. Like, you have a very strong obligation not to hurt someone. That's like a basic rule. But the obligation to help a stranger, that might depend on the situation, your ability to help, and the level of risk involved.
It's like there are degrees of obligation depending on the context.
Right. But even in everyday life, most people agree that there are some obligations to help others, especially when it's easy for you and the potential harm is significant. Like saving a child who's drowning, that's not really optional. And
Huh.
some legal systems even have Good Samaritan laws that reflect this idea.
Yeah, like you can't just stand there and watch. Okay, so where does Peter Singer fit into all of this? Because he's known for his pretty demanding views on beneficence.
Yeah, Singer. He really shakes things up. His argument is basically this. If you can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing something equally important, you're morally obligated to do it.
Okay, but that sounds so broad. What does equally important even mean?
He uses the example of a child drowning in a pond. You wouldn't hesitate to jump in and save them, even if it meant ruining your clothes, right?
Well, yeah, of course not.
His point is that the distance between you and the person in need or the number of people suffering doesn't change the basic moral principle. So if you have extra money that you could donate to help people who are starving or dying from preventable diseases, well, he's saying you're obligated to do that.
Wow, that's a lot to ask of people.
It is, and a lot of people disagree with him. They say it's unrealistic, that it creates too much guilt, and that it doesn't really align with our normal ideas of moral duty. Like donating a significant amount of your income, that's usually seen as going above and beyond, not as a basic requirement.
Yeah, it almost makes morality feel impossible, like you're always failing.
Right, and Singer has acknowledged that. He said that maybe advocating for a more achievable level of giving, like a specific percentage of income, might be more effective in the real world. But his underlying principle is still very demanding.
Okay, so even he recognizes that there are limits to how much we can expect of people. Now, the source also mentions this idea of a cooperative principle of fairness, which sounds a bit more manageable.
Yeah, so Liam Murphy, he came up with this idea. It's basically saying that your obligation is limited to your fair share of the burden, assuming everyone else is also doing their part. So you're not responsible for picking up the slack for everyone who isn't contributing.
Okay, that seems more reasonable, like we all chip in together, but what if not enough people chip in? Then the problem doesn't get solved, right?
Exactly. That's the big challenge with this approach. It might be fair to individuals, but it doesn't guarantee they will actually meet the needs out there. And this really highlights how difficult it is to figure out the exact limits of our obligations to help others, especially when it comes to big, complex problems like global poverty.
Right. No easy answers. So let's move on to this other tricky topic. Paternalism. We've been talking about helping others, but what happens when someone doesn't want our help? Like, we think it's in their best interest, that they disagree.
Ah, yes, paternalism. It's about that tension between wanting to benefit someone and respecting their autonomy, their right to make their own choices. Basically, paternalism is when you intentionally override someone's preferences for what you believe is their own good. It's like a parent making decisions for a child, even if the child protests.
Yeah, I can see how that gets tricky, especially when you're dealing with adults who are capable of making their own decisions.
And this is where John Stuart Mill comes in. He was all about individual liberty, and he was very wary of paternalism. He thought people should be free to make their own choices, even if they make mistakes, because that's how they learn and grow. He was worried that interfering too much could stifle individuality and make people dependent.
So he was against pretty much any kind of paternalism.
He was skeptical of it, yeah. But even he recognized that there might be some extreme cases where it's justified. Like, if someone is about to seriously harm themselves, and you can prevent it.
Okay, so maybe there are exceptions. But even then, the source mentions some conditions that should be considered before overriding someone's autonomy.
Right, like the harm has to be significant and preventable. You have to be pretty sure that your intervention will actually work. And you have to use the least restrictive means possible. It's like you don't want to take away someone's freedom entirely if there's a less drastic way to help them.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah,
Protecting people without controlling them.
exactly. And this debate about paternalism is still going on. Like, when is it okay to step in?
Yeah.
How do you weigh the benefits against the loss of autonomy? And are there really less restrictive alternatives? Lots of gray areas.
And we see this play out in all sorts of ways, right? Laws, policies, even just how we interact with each other.
Absolutely. Think about seatbelt laws. They take away your freedom not to wear a seatbelt, but they also prevent a lot of injuries and deaths. Or policies that ban unhealthy products like certain kinds of food or drugs. Those are all based on paternalistic ideas, even if we don't always think of them that way.
So it's about protecting people from themselves, basically.
In a way, yeah. And then there's this thing called libertarian paternalism, or nudging, which is a kind of softer form of paternalism.
Nudging. Sounds kind of sneaky.
Well, the idea is to guide people towards good choices without actually forcing them, like putting healthy food at eye level in the grocery store or making organ donation the default option on driver's license forms. It's still influencing their choices, but they can still choose differently if they want to.
So it's like a gentle push in the right direction, but it still raises questions about whether we're really respecting people's freedom. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about beneficence in the medical world. It seems like that would be a big one.
Oh yeah, beneficence is central to biomedical ethics. Doctors, nurses, researchers, they're all guided by the principle of acting in the best interests of their patients and trying to do no harm. It's all about weighing the potential benefits of a treatment against the risks.
And the source mentions the Belmont Report, which is like a big deal in research ethics. What's the connection to beneficence there?
So the Belmont Report lays out three main principles for ethical research: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And when it comes to beneficence, it's all about minimizing the risks to research participants and maximizing the potential benefits. That's why we have ethical review boards, informed consent processes, and special protections for vulnerable groups.
So it's not just about getting results. It's about protecting the people involved in the research.
Exactly. And in the actual practice of medicine, there's this debate about the ends of medicine. Like, what's the ultimate goal?
What do you mean? Isn't it just to heal people?
Well, some people, like this bioethicist named Edmund Pellegrino, argue that the core purpose of medicine is healing, restoring people to health, or alleviating suffering from illness or injury. But that's a pretty narrow view. Others argue that medicine can also encompass things like relieving pain, improving quality of life, helping people cope with chronic conditions, and respecting their choices, even if those choices don't necessarily lead to a cure.
So, like, sometimes the goal might be comfort and dignity rather than just trying to extend life at all costs.
Exactly. And this comes up a lot in end-of-life care. What constitutes a benefit in those situations can be very subjective and depends on the individual patient's values and wishes. And it's important for doctors to respect those wishes, even if they differ from the doctor's own views.
It's about empowering the patient, not just imposing your own ideas of what's best for them.
Absolutely. And the source also talks about this idea of social beneficence and public policy, using organ donation as an example.
Yeah, organ donation. That's a tough one.
It really is. It highlights the tension between individual rights and the potential benefits to society. Like, in many places, you have to opt in to be an organ donor.
Right. It's your choice.
But that leads to shortages, and people die waiting for transplants. So some people argue that we should have a system of presumed consent where everyone is assumed to be a donor unless they specifically opt out.
So putting the needs of society above individual choice.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about balancing those competing values. And this gets us into the connection between beneficence and social justice.
Social justice, how does that fit in?
Well, think about it. When we talk about things like fair access to health care or addressing social determinants of health like poverty or lack of education, those are all about creating a society that benefits all its members, especially the most vulnerable.
So it's about using the principle of beneficence to create a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Exactly. And philosophers like John Rawls, Norman Daniels, Ruth Faden, Madison Powers, they've all written extensively about these ideas and how we can create a society that truly promotes well-being for everyone. Okay, last stop on our deep dive. Beneficence in business ethics.
Oh boy, this is where it gets really complicated, right? Businesses, profits, ethics don't always seem to go hand in hand.
You're not wrong. And we have to start with Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. He was all about the invisible hand of the market, the idea that when individuals pursue their own self-interest, it actually ends up benefiting society as a whole.
So businesses are just trying to make money, and somehow that's good for everyone.
That's the basic idea, and it's led to a lot of debate about whether businesses really have a moral obligation to be beneficent. Like, if their main goal is profit, can we expect them to also prioritize the well-being of their workers, their customers, the environment?
Right, it seems like those things often conflict.
They can, definitely. And some people argue that expecting businesses to be truly beneficent is unrealistic, that it goes against the nature of a market economy.
And the source gives the example of corporate social responsibility programs, like companies donating to charity or offering discounts to low-income customers. Are those really acts of pure beneficence, or is there always some self-interest involved?
It's often hard to tell, honestly.
Mm.
Yeah, those programs can help people, but they can also boost the company's image, improve customer loyalty, even reduce their taxes. It's this tricky mix of altruism and self-interest.
Like doing good while also doing well. Okay, so maybe it's not always clear-cut, but does that mean businesses have no moral obligations to be beneficent?
Well, there's this idea called stakeholder theory, which argues that businesses have responsibilities to all the groups they affect. Their employees, customers, suppliers, the community, the environment. It's not just about the shareholders.
So a broader view of responsibility.
Right. And that would include some obligations of beneficence. And then you have companies that talk about being good corporate citizens, like Johnson & Johnson. They have this credo that emphasizes their commitment to the community and the world.
Okay, so maybe there's a growing expectation that businesses should care about more than just profits?
Yeah, I think so. But it's still debated how far those obligations go. And lastly, we have to talk about corporate benefit paternalism.
Oh yeah, paternalism. We talked about that with individuals and governments. How does it work in the business world?
It shows up in things like retirement plans that automatically enroll employees, even if they might prefer to manage their money differently, or safety regulations that require workers to wear certain gear, even if they find it uncomfortable.
So protecting people, even if it means limiting their choices.
Right. And sometimes it comes from the government, like regulations that restrict advertising or require warning labels on products. It's all about trying to protect people from harm, even if it means limiting their freedom in some way.
Wow, it's amazing how this idea of beneficence, like, are we obligated to help others? It really does touch on so many different aspects of life.
It does, right. And it's not simple. There are so many layers, so many different perspectives. It gets us thinking about our duties, our motivations, and the balance between helping others and respecting their autonomy.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners are feeling the same way. Like, where do we draw the line between what we have to do and what we choose to do? How do we balance the needs of others with our own needs? These are tough questions.
They are, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But that's why it's so important to think about these things, to have these conversations, and to be aware of how beneficence, this idea of doing good, is woven into so many aspects of our lives. So here's a final thought for our listeners. In a world facing so many challenges, inequality, climate change, rapid technological advancements, how do we balance the demands of beneficence with other important values like liberty, autonomy, and justice? It's something we all have to grapple with individually and as a society.
Big questions, no easy answers. That's what makes it so fascinating. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure.